A friend of mine recently asked me if I had seen the game where Grandmaster Kryzsztof Duda sacrificed a bishop, a rook, and a queen for a mate in 8. I said, well, that guy must have been a real chump that he was playing. Well, it turns out it was Anish Giri, one of the top 10 players in the world. And my friend was wrong about one thing. It was not a mate in 8. Duda plays a mate in 11. Absolutely amazing. This was at the Meltwater Champions. Duda has the white pieces. Anish Giri has black. An amazing, amazing game. Let's jump right in. Grandmaster Duda begins with d4. Giri plays knight f6, and after c4, e6, knight f3, d5, a queen's gambit structure, knight c3. Giri plays bishop to b4, which is known as the Rogozin. More common in the queen's gambit is to just play peacefully with bishop to e7. But bishop to b4 is what Giri plays in this game, pinning the knight and accentuating his control over e4. cd5 was played. Bishop g5 is another common idea in this variation, but cd5 was played by Duda. You can take, and then bishop to g5. What white wants to do is make this bishop on b4 look misplaced. This dark squared bishop is a very powerful piece, and it would really rather be here to deal with a pin on this f6 knight right now. So in order to help relieve some of that pressure on f6, Giri plays the knight on b1 or b8, excuse me, to d7, and now rook to c1. Classic Queen's Gambit decline play. Place the rook on the half-open c file and put pressure down that file. h6, bishop h4. You can take on f6, but after a few exchanges, white has a little bit better position with an extra central pawn, but it's close. But instead, Duda plays bishop to h4, and that invites this move, g5, bishop g3, and then knight to e4. And it's true, this h6 and g5 pawn push, it is weakening, but the idea for black is to put maximum pressure on the knight at c3 and to really force white into concrete play. Queen to b3 was played by Duda, and now capturing on c3, be taking with the pawn, otherwise he would lose material. And in this position before, the move c6 had been played to help strengthen the d5 square, but in this game, Anish Giri plays knight to b6. It does free up this bishop on c8 for activity and also helps contribute to the control of c4, which it's hard to control, but he helps limit that square a little bit. e3 frees up the bishop at f1, and now h5. So Giri already has very serious threats on the board. He's threatening h4, which would trap the bishop. The bishop can move to e5, but then f6 would complete that trap of the bishop. So Duda makes a decision. He says, you know what? If I try to save the bishop here with, say, h3, the black's just going to take it. And after pawn takes, white's just got all of these weaknesses. This is a terrible, terrible position for white. So Duda decides to go ahead and sacrifice the bishop and just play c4. The bishop at f1 and the queen help support that square. So now h4 by Giri traps the bishop at g3. So Duda moves the bishop to e5, and now f6. The bishop is now trapped, and this is the first piece that Duda sacrifices in this attack. Instead of saving the bishop, he gives it up to get a dominant center. First of all, he takes on d5, then the bishop is captured, and now bishop to b5 check. What he wants to do is interfere with the queen so the queen can't take on d5. And if black responds with bishop d7, then knight takes e5, and it looks like dynamic equality. At least the computers think so, although I would much rather have white in this position. But what Giri does instead, after the check, is he plays the move king to f8. And that way he's able to keep this queen in contact with the d5 square to later capture it. But this sure seems like a risky move. That king is in a very open area. Knight takes e5. The knight, among other things, is threatening knight to g6 check, which would fork the king and the rook. So the king moves to g7. It turns out the best move for black is queen takes d5 immediately. And then if knight to g6 check, you just move the king over, give up the exchange, and rook takes c7. And computers look at this and say, this is totally even. I wouldn't touch this position with a 10-foot pole if I was black, but the computers are a lot better than me, so what are you going to do? This mass of pawns in the center, along with the king's safety, just seems terrible for black. But computers say equal. King to g7 to stop that fork, and now bishop to d3. First of all, putting the bishop on a very powerful diagonal and then kicking the knight at e4 away. Black can't take on d5 because the queens would just be exchanged and the knight would be lost. So the knight has to move. The knight moves back to d6. Castles. White wants to play f4 and open up that f-file for the rook at f1. Black does not want that to happen. So he plays g4. So when White plays the f-pawn, he can keep the king side locked up. White does play f4, and Black doesn't bite. He's not going to take that pawn en passant because then the rooks would just double on the f-file. So after f4, rook to f8 is played by Black, and now e4. And look at this absolutely massive center and this very lonely king. One piece has already been sacrificed, but this looks like the kind of position that is ripe for further sacrifices, and it certainly is. Black plays g3. White plays f5. That keeps this bishop from activating itself along this diagonal. The queen goes to g5, threatening to come in to e3 with check and maybe grab this pawn. Rook takes c7, check, king g8, and now the move bishop to b1. And the idea is the bishop's clearing the way for the queen to move over to the king side. It also keeps this square under control so the queen can't check on e3. Because the queen at b3 controls the e3 square. So queen to d2 is played instead, and now queen to f3. And the best move here is probably just to go back to g5. But Geary in this position gives up a piece. He plays bishop takes f5. The idea is at least he can connect the rooks and maybe defend with them. Pawn takes bishop, and now queen takes d4 check. Now it looks like a double attack, right? He's attacking the king and attacking the knight. But when the king moves, if he takes the knight, then just queen to g4 check, king h8, queen h5, king g8, queen h7 is mate. So that knight is poisoned. He cannot take it. So rook a to c8, and this is the position. There's one move that forces a mate in 11 in this position, and Kryzsztof Duda finds it. The move is rook to g7 check. This is the second sacrifice of the game. The bishop had been sacrificed earlier. King takes rook, which is forced. He has no choice. And now f6 check. So if the king moves to g8, then this powerful move, bishop to h7 check. When the king takes the bishop, queen to h5, king g8, queen g5, and mate on g7. So the king has to move to h6. The king moves to h6, knight to g4 check. Now, it wouldn't do him any good to take with the queen. Not only would he be down massive material, but he would still be mated very quickly after queen to h4. The bishop and pawn control those key squares. So instead he plays king to g5. So the third sacrifice, queen to f5 check. He sacrificed a bishop, a rook, and now his queen in this now forcing sequence. The knight takes the queen, rook takes f5 check. I didn't actually look at king takes knight in my analysis, but I don't have to because h3 is an easy mate. King to g6, and now rook to e5 check. It's a check because he's moving out of the way of the bishop, which now delivers check. And in this position, Anish Giri resigned, even though he is not mated yet. There are actually 5 more moves to this mating sequence that he, being a super grandmaster, was able to see, and therefore resigned. Let's take a look at them ourselves. First, there are a couple of delaying moves, just giving up a rook and giving up a queen, just for the maximum amount of mating process. King to f7, rook to e7 check, king to g8, all forced. And now the final mating pattern. That's right, knight to h6 check, forcing king to h8. And now rook to h7 is checkmate. The bishop defends the rook, the knight controls g8, and black is finished. A beautiful mate, a game with a sacrifice of a bishop, a rook, and a queen. Now, even after going over this great game from Duda, there's still some great chess you're missing out on. Believe it or not, the video you're going to want to see to fix that problem is this video right here. I'm confident you'll love it. Goodbye.